We're beginning a new series called The Greats. And a lot of times we think about greats as great sports figures, but the Bible also has a series of greats that are great commandments or things that we should pay attention to. And they're called the Great Obedience, the Great Commission, the Great Commandment, and the Great Vision. And I know some of you might be unfamiliar with these terms, but the Great Obedience, the way we understand this is at the beginning, literally at the beginning of the Bible is where we start talking about what is the Great Obedience. The Great Obedience is how we take our physical, material world and we create something good. And in my Christian walk, I thought about the Christian walk as more about the moral of being good or being righteous or being holy, or things like spiritual, being into more of a ethereal, spiritual type of dimension. But I didn't really think about the physical. But Genesis starts right away strongly into the physical. Think about how Genesis goes. In the beginning, God created. God created the heavens and the earth. And think about all these different things he creates. He creates the animals, he creates the waters, he creates dirt, he creates the plants, and he continues on this journey. And notice they are all physical and they are all material. That is how God is working. He is working through the physical to create something. And we see that model take place with God saying he creates something and it is good. It brings him joy. And that's where we start with the Great Obedience. And the Great Obedience is found in Genesis 1:26-28. And it says, let us, starting with a relational us. God is right away beginning this process of obedience, and it needs a relational aspect of himself with humanity and ourselves in relation to others. But let us make man in our own image, in our own likeness. So we are to act like God. We are to be like God because we are created in his image. And what we see in Genesis very strongly is God carrying and bringing a physical aspect to his creation. And so the Great Obedience begins with, so they may rule over all living creatures, over all things. And realize what this means, that we are made to be good stewards of what God has called us to. We are to manage, we are to care, we are to purpose, and we are to rule all of these things. And this is our obedience to God, is that how we act towards nature, how we act towards our employees, how we act towards our management, even something as simple as working in a restaurant, making a burger, is showing an act of ruling, of caring for that which you have been given, that which you have control over, and doing it in a way that is not about self. It's not your self-interest. We have hurt a lot of things and a lot of people and a lot of our world because of self-interest. But that is not what God is calling us to rule. God is calling us to rule in care, compassion, and fruitfulness. And that brings us on to our next one. Our next command in the Great Obedience is to be fruitful, to grow. And another way of thinking about this fruitfulness is beauty. In this beauty, we see growth, we see understanding, we see things happening. And my wife recently acquired some orchids from a man who was known as Tom, who's now gone to the Lord. Both Tom and my wife took something raw. They took a plant and they cared for it, they grew it, and they brought beauty to it. And that's what fruitfulness is. Fruitfulness is taking a raw thing. That can be a raw thing of our workplace, a raw thing of our families, a raw thing of material, our yard, food, beauty, organizations, our communities, our society. We take all that and we give it purpose, we give it meaning, something that gives it life, something that gives growth, something that brings fruitfulness, the beauty of it. If we look at Genesis and we try to put a title to God's job, we would see something like a manual laborer, an architect, a builder, or an artist. That is what God is doing. He's working in the physical. He's taking something raw and he's bringing purpose. He's bringing beauty. He's bringing meaning to it. And so a great obedience for a Christian is to do the same. In my Christian walk, I divided this. I said, spirituality, God, morality, all that stuff is on this side, but it doesn't really apply as much to the real world. That could be the job or the physical, or even just doing mowing of the lawn or things like that. But that's not what Genesis lets us do. Genesis 1 shows us that God is invested in his creation because it's his creation. He actually cares about it, and he's given us the command to obey, to be relational with one another, to be fruitful with what we do, and how we rule it in caring and compassion, so that we may grow all of this, and we realize that the physical is just as important as the moral and the spiritual, so that we may know and follow God in all that we do and all that we obey.